Hello, Facebook. I'm Tom Reinhardt. I'm Director of Architecture here at George Washington's Mount Vernon. And you are joining me for our annual Karen Buchwald-Wright Preservation Challenge Facebook Live. Last year I came to you from the bowels of the mansion, down in the cellar. Today I'm standing out on a beautiful fall day. It's a little chilly, a little windy, so if I start to shiver, just bear with me. So I wanted to give you an update about what we did through your generous donations last year. So we did some very necessary work on two of our principal outbuildings, the servants' hall and the kitchen. Both of them needed work on their siding and on their underlying framing, as it turns out. And over the course of the year, we stripped paint off and we examined the siding. We figured out that, as is usual here at Mount Vernon, we have an insanely high percentage of surviving original fabric. We conserved that fabric, and we did some other necessary repairs and put everything back together and painted it all up. And that work was achieved through your help. We here at Mount Vernon are a not-for-profit, as you probably most of you know. We are not affiliated with the United States government. So all of our funding for all the work that we do to keep George Washington's home the way he left it in 1799 is through your generosity and your support. And so for that, I thank you very much. Some of the work that we did in the kitchen, especially working on the frame, sort of prefigures what we're going to be doing in the mansion in the upcoming year and a half. We did talk in the cellar about the problems that we discovered in the mansion frame and in the underlying foundation. Some deterioration that has been occurring over the last century and a quarter or so, and we found that those same conditions existed in the kitchen, and we repaired those. We replaced the sill on about half the kitchen using oak trees that were actually cut right here on the estate. Our carpenters hewed them up and put them in place and tied that frame together. And that's the sort of work that we'll be doing next year thanks to the Preservation Challenge. Now, to remind you what that challenge is, for every $1 that you give during the Preservation Challenge, and that's good till the end of 2018, for every $1 you give, it will be tripled through the generosity of a very loyal friend of Mount Vernon, Karen Buchwald-Wright from Mount Vernon, Ohio. So please, if you can give anything, we ask that you do. Give as much as you can during this last month and a half, because that's really going to provide us with a basis of acting on our preservation needs next year. So right now, I'm going to take a break to answer some questions before I go on to talk about how we'll use the proceeds of this year's Preservation Challenge.
Thanks, Tom.
Sure.
We have a couple questions. One is, how big is your preservation team?
Well, thank you for that question. And the question is, how big is the preservation team here at Mount Vernon? Well, preservation is divided into two groups here. One is archaeology, and they have a staff of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And we also have the architecture team, which is under my direction, and that is a crew of 6. We have a very talented architectural historian, Caroline Spurry, who does most of the research for us, and you may get a chance to meet her a little bit later in the year on a future Facebook Live. And we also have a very talented architectural conservator, Stephen Stuckey, and I think he also is going to be joining Caroline in a Facebook Live in a couple of weeks. We also have 2 very experienced preservation carpenters who do work on the buildings, and we have a preservation specialist, Eric Litchford. We also were able to take advantage through the benefices of your donations. We're able to actually hire in specialists that we work with quite regularly. You may hear, if you monitor our website, you'll hear the name Susan Buck, who's a internationally renowned paint analyst. We work with Andy Compton, a nationally renowned conservator who comes here regularly. He helped us recently in the front parlor. So we have a cadre of folks that we rely on a lot, but our staff, our full-time staff here at the estate for architecture is 6, including myself.
That's perfect for now. Thanks, Tom.
Okay. So, so that work that we did last year only got us part of the way. We did 2 of the 4 sides of both the kitchen and the servants' hall. So in the future, we have to strip and repair and examine and document the rest of those buildings, as well as the rest of our outbuildings, some of which are in better shape than others. We have an ongoing project in the North Garden House, which is one of those 4 beautiful octagonal buildings that have that bell-shaped octagonal roofs that Washington had built here in the 1780s. 2 of them are necessaries. 2 of them were garden houses. They were basically garden sheds. So the 2 garden houses have survived from the 18th century, and we dendrodated them recently to 1785. And we actually have the documentation in 1786 where Washington orders the new garden houses to be moved to a new spot in the gardens. So when we recently replaced roofs on the lower garden house and the upper garden house, we had underlying issues with the roof framing on the lower garden house, and the upper garden house we had issues with the wall framing. So we're in the midst of working on that upper garden house, and so your dollars can help us finish that work up. As well, you might have followed the slide that we had on the east slope, which is threatening the designed east lawn that Washington put out there. It knocked down a part of our ha-ha wall. We need to rebuild that. And we actually have a very large project in the works for next year that will improve drainage on the east slope and get the water flowing off that is threatening the house and the lawn. We'll get that channeled away from those 2 resources. We also, of course, have our mansion stabilization project. And just to refresh your memory, we realized that parts of the mansion frame had been removed in the 19th century due to termite damage, and that has compromised the stability of that frame. The house is safe. One of the things we did this past year, with your help, was to hire architects and a structural engineer to study the house. And the first question in our mind, of course, was, is the house stable? Is it safe? And yes, it is. But it is compromised. So if there were a big an event like an earthquake or a hurricane or a tornado, it would be less prepared to withstand the forces that would be exerted on it. So we want to get that taken care of so that the house will be still standing and still strong and still open to Americans and people from all over the world in 100 years or 150 years from now. The other thing that we are dealing with is, with all that water that is causing the slope failures, it's also getting into the cellar, and it's causing deterioration of the brick masonry around, foundation wall around the outside of the cellar, and some of the early inner partition walls, and we want to get that taken care of as well. And then thirdly, we would move then on to restore the entire cellar back to the way it looked when Washington were here. The most exciting part about that is that we've discovered that there were 3 little rooms off the south kitchen. There was a cellar kitchen that was built in 1775, and in one of those rooms we have found evidence that it almost certainly places an enslaved family living in the mansion with the Washingtons, and we've never had evidence for that before, and now we do. It was Frank Lee, the butler, and his wife Lucy, the cook, and their children. So we are very excited about peopling that space back to represent the whole range of inhabitants at Mount Vernon, not just the Washingtons and their family and their friends and their guests, but also the enslaved people who made this place run for the Washingtons so smoothly. So that is something that after we get the mansion stabilized, we're going to undertake as well. So I'm happy again to take any questions that you might have about these projects and about anything else we do. This is an AMA, Ask Me Anything, and we're ready to answer your questions.
Great, thank you, Tom. Michelle would like to know if you can explain the outside bricks and how they're made.
So I'm not sure, Michelle, whether you mean the bricks in the foundation or the appearance of blocks that make up the wall. So the first thing I'll say is the bricks. In the 18th century, when you lived on a plantation, bricks were made on site. So we have all the documentation that Washington hired a family of brickmakers named Triplet, and they would come and they would source the clay right off on the plantation. They would make the bricks, they'd burn the bricks, and there were tens of thousands of bricks made here. There have been a couple of brick kilns. The kilns are actually made out of the bricks themselves when they're sun-dried. They've been identified archaeologically on the estate. So we know that they're burning bricks here, they're making bricks for doing all the brickwork. That's the foundation and the chimneys And for example, the few brick buildings we have, the greenhouse slave quarter and the stable, and then the other barns that Washington built in the 1790s were also brick. They were out on the other four outlying farms. If you're asking about the appearance of these big stone blocks, well, then you've gotten fooled just the way that George Washington wanted to fool you. This house is made out of wood. And what Washington wanted to make it look like is that it's a big stone house. So he did a process known as rustication. He took the siding boards and he beveled them and edged them so that they look like they're a series of stone blocks in courses. And then, in order to fake you out right up close when you get right up to the house, he gave very detailed instructions in the 1790s about painting those siding boards and then throwing sand that was made from the local sandstone, taking blocks of local sandstone, breaking it down back into sand, and throwing it onto that wet paint to make it look like it was a stone block. Now, you might ask, why didn't he just use stone blocks? Well, that's very, very expensive. And two, and this is more important, the sandstone, which is the local stone here, is terrible. And that's part of the problems that we're having in the cellar is it's so soft and so susceptible to moisture getting in it and wearing it away that you really didn't want to build a house out of stone. So his only other choice, if he wanted to show you that he was a man of taste and affluence, was to fake it by doing this rusticated siding that is then coated in the local sand.
Perfect. Thanks, Tom. Joe is making the trip here to Mount Vernon in the summer of 2019 and is wondering if the mansion or portions of it will be closed during that time.
Well, so we have a couple of big projects going on in 2019. First off, we just got approval to upgrade our fire suppression system. So that will have a little bit of impact, but not a lot. In fact, I think it's pretty exciting. So if you come here, Joe, in 2019, and you come into the central passage, we may have removed the plaster ceiling from the central passage, and you'll be able to see all of the original framing of the second floor passage. And that's going to be super exciting. So everybody should come out and see that, because that's going to be a once-in-a-lifetime experience. We also, in order to prepare for the stabilizing of the mansion frame, we want to make sure that the siding boards all around the outside of the mansion are in the best shape possible, because while we're doing that work, they're going to be doing extra duty, holding all of the posts, all the vertical members of the frame, the posts and the studs, door posts, window posts, all that has to be held in place. So we are having, this year has been really, really wet for us, and it's caused the paint to kind of show its age. And so we have to get in there, strip off the paint, and conserve all the siding boards and fix if there are any small problems with the frame, with windows, with doors, make sure everything is in the best condition possible. So the west front is going to be shrouded in scaffolding for the course of 2019. And again, this is really an exciting opportunity for our visitors, because you have to think about it this way. Mount Vernon was always under construction during the time that the Washingtons were here. So you're going to get to experience Mount Vernon the way that George and Martha Washington did all those centuries ago. Just think how lucky you are when you come here and we've got scaffolding. At least that's what I'm telling our visitor engagement people. They may feel a little bit differently, but I think it's very exciting.
It is. Thanks, Tom. We have an excellent question. Someone wants to know what huge project you would like to do if you had unlimited funds.
Well, the projects that we're starting, which is fire suppression, that's really on the top of my list because I want to protect this house forever. And then secondly, I want to see it stabilized. But what I would really like to do is I would like to have the resources to do all the research and documentation that in the past has always been sort of the second afterthought, right? It has always been the primary mission is to preserve and conserve, but learning about Mount Vernon, its history, why Washington did the things he did, and how he accomplished them, how his both his free and enslaved craftspeople did the work they do. That's what I'd like to see, because my goal is to really write the book on the architectural history of Mount Vernon. So I'd like to see that happen. But on the grounds, I would like every building to be in the best shape that it can. All the roofs tight, all the windows in good shape, all the siding done, all the frames in good shape, all the interiors returned to their 1799 appearance, which we would understand better if we did all that research. So it's all part and parcel. Research and preservation, they go hand in hand here at George Washington's Mount Vernon now, and we've got to, and I'd like to see that go forward. And that takes money. It takes very talented people working here, and so that would be my dream, is to see a really vibrant and active preservation program just exploding onto Mount Vernon. That would be it.
If the Central Passage has been wallpapered yet.
Well, so no. The Central Passage, the wooden parts of it, the paneled parts on the first floor, they were painted in January of 2018 to their 1799 cream color. The wallpaper will go up onto the stairway, and then up on the second floor passage. And no, that has not yet been done. We have a few fragments of that wallpaper that have survived, and our curators have been researching those fragments of wallpaper and trying to identify the pattern. And that, as you might understand, that takes some time. They're looking through pattern books and archives in the United States, at other historic house museums, and in all over the world. I remind you that when we did the new room, it was, they knew that the new room had a border, a wallpaper border at the bottom above the chair rail, all the way back in the 19th century. But they didn't find the full pattern until 2012 in an archive in Paris. So this research can take a long time. So our curators are being really careful, and they're being very conscientious in doing this research, but we still are very hopeful that we'll have the pattern identified and reproduced by the end of the year. Not this year, 2019.
About the east slope. Amy's wondering if the stabilization of the east slope was ever a concern during Washington's time.
Yes, it was. It has always been a problem. And the reason it's always been a problem is because of the geology of the top of the slope. So the slope is kind of like a layer cake with big, thick layers of marine clay, and then layers of sand in between those layers of marine clay. So water is moving through that sand in ways which are causing the marine clay to sort of be unsupported and to drop and break off. And we know that Washington dealt with similar slides that we see today. And we know that he did a survey from the piazza door of the Central Passage, and he took measurements, he took elevations all the way down the slope, all the way to the river, so that he could monitor that slope during his lifetime. And so that's pretty interesting, that this is a problem that the general hadn't figured out a way to conquer, and we hope with modern technology that we will be able to conquer it for him. So if you do have questions, please send them our way, because we're ready to answer them.
So we have a question. What would you say is your favorite part of the current restoration that you're doing?
My favorite part of the current restoration we're doing, which is the front parlor, is the room that we're working on now. And what we did in the front parlor was we took out some of the paneling that had gone in the 1760s and was showing some severe signs of distress. And we took them out and we conserved those panels and then put them back in. My personal favorite part of that work was to see behind those panels, because what we saw and what we learned was that that behind the wooden panels was an earlier generation of wall finish that dated to 1734, the time when Washington's father had the house built. And not only did we see the 1734 finishes, we had chair rail, we had baseboard, we had cornice, all completely intact behind that paneling. That's exciting for me as an architectural historian. That our team was so overjoyed to find that. But we also found that the first generation of plaster in that room was just a normal flat plaster. Maybe it had wallpaper on it, we don't know. It got replaced in the 1740s, we believe, that's the date we believe it is, by Lawrence Washington, and it was a super high-end, super fancy raised plaster paneling that mimics the wooden paneling that replaced it. And so to understand that even before George Washington took over ownership of Mount Vernon, it was a house. That early house, which sometimes people refer to as a farmhouse, baloney. It was not a farmhouse. It was a big, fancy gentry house from the beginning. So you have to imagine the vision that the Washington family had as early as the 1730s was to build a plantation estate here, and they build a big 40 by 30 foot house in the middle of nowhere, and they're finishing it with high-end plasterwork that you would see in London at the same time. That's pretty exciting. That's a pretty interesting view of this family that spawned the father of our country.
Very good. And JC is wondering if there were any artifacts unearthed after the landslide on the east slope.
Yes, there were. Yes, got it. Okay. When they said repeat questions, you're all yelling at me. Repeat the question, and I'm dense and I didn't get it. Were there artifacts found during when we had the slope failure? Yes, there were, and everyone's laughing at me now too. Yes, there were. Because what we learned, of course, is that we found a bunch of trash from the 18th century that had been thrown down that east slope. If you go and look on our website at the Midden web pages, M-I-D-D-E-N, a midden is a big trash dump. And early in the 18th century, down the south slope of the house, down on the kitchen end, thrown down that hill, there were declivities, there were little low spots, and they were using that as fill. They were using trash as fill, throwing bones and broken china and things like that down the hill. And we're finding the same sort of deposition down beyond the ha-ha wall down the east slope. And so, yes, we're finding things. I know, I think one of the things they found, and Luke Pecoraro, Director of Archaeology, that's the second time he was called that today. Luke Pecoraro, Director of Archaeology, will correct me if I'm wrong when he does his Facebook Live, but I think they found a Daniel Park Custis seal down there. I know they found one in the South Grove, but I think they also found one down the east slope, and that would have been a wine bottle seal from Martha's first husband that would have come with her when she moved here in 1759.
Great. So we actually have a couple questions about you, Tom. Someone would like to know how you got interested in historical architecture.
The question is how I got interested in historical architecture. Well, since I was a child, I have loved history. My grandfather loved history. My father loves history, and that really was. I will say it was encouraged in me. I won't say beaten into me by family vacations to historic sites, and that's why Mount Vernon is such a great place for families to come, because it opens up our history and it opens up the world to children. You know, when they see this place with their eyes, they ask the most amazing questions. So families should come and experience that here. This is a great place to bring children. But I loved coming here. I came here when I was 10 years old in 1977. And I remember walking around here with my family. So ever since that point, I knew I wanted to do something in history. And I had kind of a varied career myself. I loved archaeology, and I have degrees in archaeology. I worked as an archaeologist for over 10 years. And then, but my specialty in archaeology, interestingly enough, was Greek architecture. So I worked in Greece on historic buildings over there. And then I decided that I wanted to concentrate on American buildings. And I came back and I got a degree in the architectural history of America. And then I worked for the state of Maryland, surveying and recording historic buildings throughout the state. And then I came here to lead the architecture program when it was established here in 2013. So it has been something that I've loved my entire life. And people often think that I'm an architect. But I'm not an architect, I'm an architectural historian. So I study old buildings, and I understand how they are built and how they were used, and I understand how to fix them, but I'm not an architect. I don't design buildings myself.
Very good, thank you. And Shauna has another question about you and is wondering what your personal favorite aspect of the mansion's architecture is.
My personal favorite aspect of the mansion's architecture. I love the layering of the mansion. I love that we are able to peel back its layers like an onion and learn about the earlier generations of Washingtons who lived here, who altered and lived here, used and altered this space. I also find it really interesting how the Washingtons adapted the house to their lifestyle by adding that south wing, which really was a completely private space for them because they were entertaining so many guests. I find that really fascinating. It's a unique house in American architecture, and it's funny because I recently saw a reference to the big two-storied porch like the piazza, and they said a traditional colonial two-story porch. There was no traditional colonial two-story porch. George Washington invented it, and now it is used everywhere on American homes, on American banks, on American motels. It's used everywhere, and but it was something that came from here. This is where it was invented. So I'm going to take a second now to remind you to please donate during the course of this Facebook Live and keep donating after this Facebook Live. Get your friends, get your family, get everybody, accost people on the street and tell them about how great Mount Vernon is. Remind them what it means to America to have the home of our founding father and his family and the people, the community that lived here and supported him while he founded this great republic of ours. Please remember that we rely on you and your donations to do the work that we do and to welcome over 1 million visitors a year here to learn about Washington and to experience the life that he led here at Mount Vernon. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, we have time for just a couple more, Tom, if you do.
Okay, I do.
Okay. So Kevin is wondering what the dates are that you're restoring the mansion to since Washington remodeled so many times.
Right, that is a fantastic question. Kevin is asking, what are the dates that we're restoring the mansion to since Washington remodeled it so many times? So, you're correct. Washington did remodel it so many times. When he comes here in the 1750s, he does a major expansion of the house, builds a second story, builds a full cellar. Then in the 60s, there's work being done. In the 70s, he expands it again. In the 80s, he puts on the Dove of Peace. In the 90s, he comes back and totally redoes the house. And one of my favorite Washington quotes is that he says, "I have not a room to put a guest in or to set myself in where there is not the ring of hammers and the odoriferous smell of paint." That was a man having a major home renovation going on. We are very lucky that we have a great amount of documentation at the time of Washington's death in 1799. So when Washington dies, they took an inventory of the entire interior of the house. So it tells us what furniture, what art, what knickknacks and bric-a-brac they had on their tables and on their mantelpieces. And then 2 years later, when Mrs. Washington died, they went through the same process. So we have an abundance of information about about Mount Vernon during the end of their lives. So we restore the house to 1799. So when you go through, what you're going to see is the post-presidency Mount Vernon. So that's from 1797 to 1799. And we have a lot of documentation about the work that was being done right after the presidency, that renovation work that I mentioned. But we also, as I said, we learn a lot about the entire history from 1734 all the way up until yesterday, about the work that was done here during the 160 years that the Mount Vernon Ladies Association has been caring for this property. And so all that information we put into reports. It doesn't just doesn't get lost. We study it, we analyze it, we write it up, and it goes into our archive. But for me, what's really great is our fantastic website, because that allows us to talk about the 1734 house, the 1740s house, to do reconstructions of those. We have a great new tour, the art glass tour, where you wear these groovy glasses and you can see augmented reality, and you stand out in front of the house and you can see what it looked like in 1734, you can see what it looked looked like in the 1760s. It's really fantastic, very exciting stuff. But through those technological advancements of those tours and our great website, which you should visit a lot, there you can learn about all those earlier periods of development at Mount Vernon. And you can also on our website donate today to our Preservation Challenge. Now remember, I'm going to remind you that for every dollar that you donate between now and the end of the year, Karen Buchwald-Wright, a very generous supporter of Mount Vernon, a staunch supporter from Mount Vernon, Ohio, will triple, you give one, she gives two, triple your dollar. And that helps us. It's like you're giving us 3 times the power to preserve Washington's house with your donation if you do it between now and the end of the year.
Thanks for the reminders, Tom. We have a question from Kat, who's wondering, besides the main house, which structure on the property is the most architecturally significant?
Besides the main house, which structure on the property is the most architecturally significant? Well, I think there's different layers to that. I think historically, I would say that the second most important structure on the property would be Washington's tomb, right up there with his home. That's where his remains repose. But I think you can't really pull out, once you get beyond the mansion, I think it's difficult to pull out one single structure because they were all working together in a system of management and production and economy on the estate. So when you look at the North Lane outbuildings, the gardener's house, the salt house, the spinning house, the blacksmith shop, those were all production buildings that were being used to actually to fund Washington's ability to be president, his ability to go off and be a general in the war, right? He was making money by using those buildings. When you look at the South Lane, you've got the storehouse, the smokehouse, the wash house. Those buildings, going all the way down to the stable, they worked as a whole to support the life at the mansion. So the smokehouse is where all the meat's coming from, goes right into the kitchen and then into the dining room. So they really work as a system, and that's what makes Mount Vernon so special, is because we are one of the best preserved 18th century estates, plantation estates, that has survived. And it's because while all the other plantations were starting to go into disrepair at the end of the 19th century, we had become a museum. And so the level of care continued and even got better as time goes on. And I like to think that today we're giving this place the best care that it possibly can, with advances in technology and a dedicated staff which reflects the values of the first Mount Vernon Ladies Association in the 1850s and 60s.
So one more question I think we have time for from Clay, who's wondering which room is next on the preservation list to be returned to 1799.
I think I know who Clay is. I think this is one of our former interns. So Clay asks, what is the next room on the list to get restored back to 1799? Well, as I said, we've got a few things going on in between. We've got fire suppression, we've got mansion stabilization, west front restoration. Very exciting projects that you should come out and see and ask questions. Ask all the interpreters questions about what we're doing in preservation, because that's a big part of our story here. But the next room that will go through a major transformation, like the blue room, like the chintz room, like the new room, like the front parlor, which will be finished by Washington's birthday, and then you should come out and see the amazing transformation of that space as well. The next room will be the yellow bedroom. So that's a bedroom, second floor in the in the southeast corner of the main block of the house. Our visitors on the tour go right through it, so it's one of the few rooms that you actually get to walk through and experience the space as a room instead of just looking into it as sort of a tableau. It's going to be really exciting. Already we've got a great display in there of how an 18th century bed goes together, so you can see that. But then after we do all the architectural work and the rest of the curatorial work, you can come back again. We're never static. We're always changing. There's always something new to see. There's always something new to learn here at Mount Vernon. And it is paid for by you. So come and visit. Your entrance fee funds our work. Come to our website and donate, because your donation will be tripled between now and the end of the year. So I think that's all we have time for this Facebook Live. I appreciate you sticking with me. It's been a little chilly. I hope that you should make yourself a little cup of tea and warm yourself up, because I know that's what I'm going to do. Thank you very much for your time. And remember, the Preservation Challenge, sponsored by Karen Buchwald Wright. From now until the end of the year, your donations are tripled. Tell your friends, tell your families. And thank you, and goodbye from George Washington's Mount Vernon.